Joining me now is Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, as Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs and former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce, a peace memorial in a Victorian council, backed by an RSL branch that honours all people who have faced great dangers in the fight for freedom of all countries and doesn't single out Australians or even the conflicts that we've been involved in. I mean, wow. What do you make of this?
What's it there for? Boudica. Maybe Queen Boudica is represented in that memorial. But on a more serious note, what happens if those who are invading Australia, the Japanese Imperial Army, if they thought that, I'm sure there's some of them thought they were doing it for the betterment of the world, a peaceful transition to under imperial Japan. The fact that we'd been enslaved as a people and destroyed, it seems to be irrelevant. I'm sure there were some people in fascist Germany who, for what bent and twisted ideas, they might have thought they were doing the world a favour. Are we representing them in the memorial? The memorials are supposed to represent the Australian people who died protecting Australia, fighting for our nation in conflicts against adversaries who completely were in the wrong, whether it was Imperial Japanese, whether it was fascism, whether it was protecting Australia from communism. That's what war memorials are supposed to represent. Our nation, our blood, our people who went out and engaged with the enemy by day or by night, but regardless of season, weather or terrain. That's what war memorials are supposed to represent.
Well, talking about war memorials, what about the Australian War Memorial? By law, it's there to mark the sacrifice in wars for Australia, for the nation of Australia. In fact, now it's got a whole lot of exhibits about the so-called Aboriginal wars of resistance as well. I mean, it's right from the top. The rod is starting right from the top.
Well, this is crazy. There is no Australian army that fought in a war in Australia against Aboriginal people. It just didn't happen, okay? It is not the truth. There was no general who was responsible for a conflict against Aboriginal people. It just did not happen. It is mythology, and it is false mythology to try and make this up. There were certainly skirmishes, there were police events, there were criminal events, but there was no war. And when people say there was a war, it is just belies either their understanding of history or their willingness to tell the truth. It did not happen. So to represent something in the war memorial that did not happen, there was not one person, one Australian soldier in an Australian uniform that went out and fought against an Aboriginal army or was under the command of a general as part of a campaign. It just never happened. So why do we get sucked into this sort of lefty rubbish where we feel embarrassed about telling the truth? It just didn't happen, so it shouldn't be in the war memorial.
There were actions against what was thought as criminal gangs at the time. I don't recall a war, but people are determined to make it look so. Meanwhile, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, I mean, I tell you, Barnaby, it's going to be a theme this year. I think pushing back against the people trying to divide and trash Australia is really important, and it's going to gain ground because we're now seeing the fraying of this country. Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, he's called for a boycott of Woolworths stores after Woolworths banned the sale of merchandise for Australia Day. But I heard Agriculture Minister Murray Watt today, and he thought this was outrageous. He thought, who would care if a major supermarket refuses to let shoppers celebrate Australia Day? Here he is.
Our government is focused on the war on inflation. Peter Dutton is always focused on a culture war. Peter Dutton is focused on putting the jobs of more than 200,000 workers at risk just so he can score a cheap political point on a radio station.
I mean, Murray Watt ended with an idiocy there. It's not putting the jobs of 200 people at Woolies, 200,000 at risk, because if you switch your custom to Coles, that's more jobs for Australia. So basically, it's a net win. What do you make of it all?
Oh, well, first of all, it's disgraceful that Woolworths have this belief. I don't believe it's the shareholders of Woolworths, and I don't believe it is the customer. It's obviously not the customers of Woolworths, but it's that little clique that little special clique who, like me, probably went to the appropriate school in the appropriate suburb, and now they are fighting their culture war against Australia. They've decided that they'll impose on their organisation that they can't, that they will not be selling the merchandise to celebrate Australia's day. This is the day where people who have gone beyond what they have to do as a citizen, where we respect and we reflect and we honour those people who have done so much for our nation, probably a lot more than a lot of those executives and senior apparatchiks in Woolworths have done for our nation. It also represents the fact that from a penal colony and from the Aboriginal people and a penal colony of convicts, we've created this incredible nation, the most egalitarian nation on earth, where you don't have to be born in the better suburbs to get to the top. And I think that's worth celebrating.
Barnaby, look, we keep getting told we're part of Asia, you've got to accept it. You look throughout Asia, right? Throughout Asia, with a couple of, maybe an exception, Japan, you would struggle. I dare say you wouldn't find a country as free and egalitarian and wealthy and secure and safe as Australia. I do not understand why we should be ashamed of this country.
Well, this is the thing, it's part of that cultural clique, the G&T politics at evening, that, oh, well, you know, we've got to do something that's maybe, you know, makes us feel better about the fortunate circumstances we were born to and we live in. And we do it by trashing Australia Day. What they are doing, though, is people are aware of it. And the more they try to trash Australia Day, the more that people will say, no, you're not. And they'll stand up for it, and they'll absolutely make sure that people see their patriotism towards our nation, because that's the glue that holds us together. Your own little individual sort of causes where you decide that the way you're going to be recognised is to smash something up does not create a stronger nation. It destroys the nation we have. You don't see the French doing this to the Bastille Day, or even the Chinese. Their national day is the celebration of Mao coming in, who was responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. Yet the same people will go to business functions with those Chinese businessmen and you know, and say what a wonderful outfit that is.
Yes.
Probably because there's a buck in it for them.
Barnaby, I think this country needs a really fundamental reevaluation of where it's going, and that's got to happen this year.